Hello everybody, my name's John Darg. I'm a Key Account and Clinical Affairs Manager for Dentsply Sirona, and I'm feeling, well, almost overwhelmed with the amount of CEREC knowledge that we have in the room, because we're fortunate to be joined not by one of our CEREC trainers, but two. We've got Lino Adolf, who is our CEREC new user trainer, and we've got Simon Fieldhouse, who is our digital impression new user trainer. So welcome to you both.
Thank you, John.
Now, in this particular session, we're going to have a roundtable chat about CEREC and particularly how far you can take CEREC. We're going to be exploring the outer reaches of what we're able to do with CEREC in a dental practice. And following that, we're also going to be exploring when to involve your laboratory partner and how important the laboratory partner is when you get to that step. So, guys, if we can kick off with that really, how far can we take CEREC?
A good question. I think the best, but because of the workflow, how it happens, I think we'd start off with the opinion on the clinical side, and then as a dental technician, then I would kind of like see to what extent, or at least my opinion, where what I would say would be the right part, where I find that, okay, I think this is where the lab should kick in my opinion on that aspect. So,
and absolutely, and Lino makes a great point. So just before we go any further, Lino, would you like to introduce yourself and your background?
So my name is Lino Adolf. I'm a dental technician. I've been doing digital dentistry for, since 2019, but my first contact was way before that. I was still in uni. But yeah, but mainly do digital for pretty much 98% digital restoration since 2011. And I embrace CEREC and in-lab as much as possible in my day-to-day workflow. So yeah, I'm trying to get 100% digital, but I'm not there yet.
Okay, okay. Is that ever possible, guys, to get 100%?
We're getting closer, aren't we?
I think so.
We were having a scary conversation off camera, weren't we, about artificial intelligence and how it's a bit frightening sometimes. But I think the AI in dentistry is reassuringly effective, but hasn't replaced us yet, has it? You know.
I hope it doesn't, at least on my life. I don't want to lose my job. But yeah, but I think it's getting closer and closer, and I think there's one of the steps that I've seen now, especially with the prime scan. You know, there's one of your colleagues, like Carlos Rapullo, and he's published a bit where we can start doing quite a few nice things with prime scan when it comes to implants and stuff like that. So the technology is going down that path, but I don't think we're going to go 100% digital in terms of, when I mean 100% digital, in terms of the workflow, I think we can, but not to the degree where you don't have human interaction. I don't think we're there yet, and I hope it doesn't happen, to be honest.
I think that's a great insight, and so that really leads nicely into how far you can actually take CEREC. So one of the things that we previously discussed is anterior aesthetics. So we've got a variety of different topics that we can talk about. I think aesthetics and also implant workflows are probably worthy of this particular conversation. So if we take the opinion that CEREC is good for posterior restorations, and that potentially is what somebody's using it for predominantly, how far would you say that you can take it into the aesthetic zone, and what are the results like?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have, I suspect, similar opinions. The reality is you can do quite a lot more than you might think with the CEREC system. You just have to have an eye on when you do need to use your laboratory. I've said it before that when you first start using the technology, you think you can do everything with in-house milling, including repairing the Forth Road Bridge. And after a few years and a few sort of sweaty sessions, you realise that maybe I'd have been better off sending a digital impression here. And there are some things at the moment that I absolutely would not attempt with the CEREC system, but we do a lot. You know, when you see clinicians saying, well, I always get the technician to do the shade for me, and hey, that's great because they will do it way better than I ever will. But the reality is that the majority of practitioners, if you like, it's not practical. And so if for no other reason than you can produce some very high quality, good aesthetic restorations in-house, the CEREC comes into its own there. But then if you have a good relationship with your laboratory and digital communications, so long as you and your technician sort of agree on, you know, when they're going to get involved, which is a lot, and when they don't need to, then it works really, really well.
You know, I have to agree on that one. I think everything is possible, right? It all depends on how much time you're actually willing to spend to do certain things. Now, when we work on the posterior region, and I was like talking to you just early on, okay, so primary we're focusing on function, so restoring function, not so much in terms of the aesthetics, all right? So it's kind of like easier, so the learning curve is not as steep.
Okay.
But the minute you start working on the anterior region, that's your business card right there, right? So it takes a little bit more time to actually achieve the results you're actually thinking about. All right, so I'm doing this, but how do I get to that? And I think it's obviously not just the fact that you need to know a little bit more on how the software works. You pretty much be utilizing all the tools that CEREC has to offer. But not just that, it's time. And I find that you need to put it on the time in terms of the design, because spending that time is what you give to the machine, and then the machine kind of like mills it out. But that's just part of the equation. Then when it comes out, there's a lot of work that goes into it. So, you know, perfecting, just like fine-tuning the restorations, and then giving that character, you know, surface character, finishing it off, so that when you do cement that, then it has that natural appearance to it. So there's a lot of sort of work. Then it's not just the designing process, but it's also the fact that there's a lot of work that has to be put on to those restorations. Now, there's also the beauty of the way that the system works. And this is where you can actually decide to say, I'm doing an anterior, let's say 4-4. So you're not matching really, like doing like a single central, right? So I think there, you either want a layer, or you actually have the knowledge, or you send it to your lab. But doing like 4-4, kind of like, oh, I can do this because I'm not really matching anything. So what you're looking for is for form, having, you know, everything there, and basically matching a decent shade. But let's say that you don't want to do the design, right? And I think this is where the whole flow actually works quite nicely, is where you can team up with your dental lab, where you say, well, you know what, I want to do it, but I don't want to be spending the time designing this, because let the lab do it. So that's one approach, right? So you can say, okay, I'll do the digital impressions, but I actually want to do this. So you send it to the lab, and the lab has the possibility of designing it for you and sending those restorations back to you. So you, at least you know, okay, I've got the experience that lab technicians have, because they work with us day in, day out. They'll do it much quicker. So they can provide this for you. So this is one way of actually approaching the anterior region. And then obviously you just have to focus on finishing off those restorations, which is also a little bit demanded, but not as much if you're doing a single central.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the single central is the hardest one to do. Really difficult. And you know, there are times when you'll do it and you'll get it right. And again, experience helps. And then there'll be the time when you don't get it right. But the good thing is you've got two options. Then you will either say, well, we'll do a really nice temporary for you here, it's not quite right, and we'll get the laboratory to make it, and they will get it right, and you will send them the information they need. Or if you think, well, actually, all I really needed to do was this, half an hour or so later, you've made it, and it's ready and it's in. So there are occasions when you can do that yourself still in-house. And as Lino said about, if you're doing sort of the upper 4-4, upper 5-5, I mean, there are times when we will do that. And yes, in some ways it is easier, isn't it? Because you're not worrying as much about matching. You know, as I said, that horrendous sort of upper central, which is really difficult. The basic shade, as long as you've picked a sensible one, it's actually quite straightforward. And there are occasions when we might do that and say, well, actually, I'm really comfortable with the designing side of it here. And you say, well, tell you what, I'm actually going to book a day to do this. And you might think, a whole day? But actually, from the business point of view, you know, you do 10 good restorations in a day that you design yourself, you manufacture and finish them, then that makes a lot of sense. And because you're taking your time, the reality is it probably doesn't take you all day. So it's quite a stress-free way of doing it. Now that doesn't mean that all of my cases that need upper 5-5, I do. I don't. I use the laboratory a lot. But I'm just saying it is possible to do that. But you have to know your limitations, and you have to not put yourself under any pressure.
Yeah, I think that's the key.
It's something that I just want to try and explore a little bit more if we can, because I think in our previous session, Lino, Simon and I were talking about the efficiencies that CEREC can create within a practice and make it so much more efficient. But what I'm keen to know, because you just said then, Simon, that there are some cases that you would take on and some that you would send to your lab. What sort of case is it that goes beyond efficiency when actually it's starting to take too much time? How do you make that decision between doing the case yourself and sending it to your lab?
In my case, it's usually how much I'm perspiring when I'm doing it. You know, I mean, I used to make implant bridges in house, and obviously the implants were perfectly positioned every time. The angulation, the depth was right most of the time. But even in those cases, it's really difficult. Actually, in my hands, I know there are other people that say, oh yeah, we make quite a few, and they've probably made more than I have. But you know, learning curve, I don't make implant bridges anymore. I could, but the laboratory will make it so much better. And again, the workflow is really easy. And okay, I've got a laboratory fee to pay, but actually I've also not spent hours trying to make it, so it balances out. And certainly in my hands, I will always get a much better implant retained bridge from my laboratory than I would make. So as I say, learning curve, as long as we're not doing any harm, which we never do, I think it's a worthy pathway to follow. And certainly, yeah, for me, it was great to think, well, yes, I can do this, but nope, not for me.
Yeah, I tend to agree, because there's parts where you can say, well, I can do this because you're providing a service to your patient, right? And you might get patients that aren't kind of like, well, we use the word a little bit of phobia, that they don't really want to be there too long. So if you can treat those patients and you send them home, okay, fine, it's done, then fair. But then there are cases where I find that you know, doing with the lab, working with the lab, the outcome, because we do this day in, day out, right? I think it's just what we do, right? So I think the outcome, because we're not a little bit sort of contained in terms of time, because when you do this on the day, you kind of like say, okay, I have to do this within this amount of time. Whereas if you send it to your lab, okay, it's within that working that you need to wait the time, whatever timing they have. But whatever you get back, all you need to do is kind of like just seat it and patient goes their way. So it's that stress on your shoulders that you need to actually deliver something. And I find when it comes to implants, it's pretty straightforward. But when it comes to bridges, it can be a little bit tricky to do chairside, and I think the outcome is not the same. And it also comes down the route of materials, because I think the choice of materials we have in the lab, way, you know, more diverse in terms of choices there.
You led me on to that a question nicely, which is how much of this is down to materials, how much is down to equipment and technology, and how much is down to software ability?
I think everything is interlinked.
It is, absolutely.
I think you need a good scan, then it's a scanner, so you have your DI. So that's fundamental to get that nice sort of image to work on. So that's the thing. And then having a good software that you can actually work with, and it's easy to use. So it's not killing a lot of time to kind of like do things, so you get that. And this is where I wouldn't say AI working with CEREC, but it's got a very good biogenetic algorithm there that aids anyone on the posterior region really good, so you don't have to worry about too much about it. So you've got the software, it's key to provide that solution. But then, okay, now I've designed everything, then you've got your molds that you've got to pick, and then obviously the limitations you have is obviously in practice, majority of the practice that do chairside restorations are working with 4-axis milling units. And when you do implant restorations, if it's a single unit, you're fine. But when you do implant bridges, then you have to go down the route potentially with a 5-axis milling unit. And not all dental practice have 5-axis milling units. So hence using a lab for it, right? And then obviously comes the materials. So if you have a 4-axis and you're doing zirconia, for example, you're limited to doing, like on implant cases, you've got meso blocks. But with the 5-axis, it's just milling it out of a disc. So this is kind of like, it's everything combined. And obviously the end, okay, what material am I going to use for this? It's one, what are you restoring? And then it's function, and then it's the aesthetics, and then how am I going to finish it? If it's monolithic, I want something. So you're always looking for the best solution possible, but within the entire workflow but obviously it's the choice of material at the end that makes the difference as well.
Yeah,
So.
definitely. I mean, in the early days of digital dentistry, people were producing things that fitted very nicely, but they looked like Nuttall's Mintos. You may not be old enough to remember what they were, but they were sort of a nasty mint, or tombstones. And obviously, as the material choices improved, we can do more chairside. But again, absolutely agree with Lino. They can do more than we can. So, the increase in the material availability has been brilliant. There are, of course, some very exciting new materials coming out, which we may be talking about another time in detail, and that's going to help us, but we don't have the full range. And also it's the combination of materials as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It may be the abutments, and often it is the abutments made from something completely different to the actual restoration. Not always. But we certainly at the moment we can't do that. Now they are talking about Prime Mill being able to mill titanium blocks at some point in the future, and whilst that sounds great, and yes, maybe I will definitely look at that, but again, that for me it may be that no, I'll leave it to the experts.
I find it's the fine balance, right? And I think CEREC as a whole, it's a huge tool where dentists can provide an optimum sort of like service to a patient, right? To the point where they feel comfortable doing certain things, but it's going back once again. So you have got that, but the diversity of materials that we have in the lab surpasses what usually a dental practice will have. So because you tend to cater a little bit more like single units, maybe 3-unit bridges. So you kind of have material range that will cover those sort of aspects.
Yeah.
So this is the bit that it's important where you kind of say, well, I feel comfortable doing this, but then I could actually do it, but then I don't have the materials to do it. So then you'd kind of draw the line. Okay, I'll send it to the lab to do this. I think it needs to be at all times in a way where this partnership between a dental practice and the dental lab has to be there. You cannot just say, well, I don't need a dental lab, because I don't think it's feasible, right? To some extent, yeah, you could survive without a lab, but not to the degree where very complicated cases or whatever they may be, you still need that cooperation. And using CEREC, or that means to some part of it, okay, I've used it, but now I'll let the lab sort of carry on and just finalize the work. So that cooperation is super important. And when it comes to the digital world, I just find that relationship between dental labs and dental practices, or the dentist itself, I think is just increased. It's just become so much nicer, and the communication much smoother.
With digitally, absolutely. I mean, you're getting better impressions, aren't you?
Without a doubt.
And that's one of the
I'm
main
not going to
things.
complain.
No. I mean, getting a sort of a very nice little note from the technician saying impression C. Okay, does that mean it's grade C or something else? But that just doesn't happen with these things. I think what we've got to remember also is that you have what's the definition of an expert? Somebody that knows more and more about less and less. And the danger with things like this is you have people who are experts, whatever that means. Perhaps I've just defined it, but we talk about full arch cases, we talk about reconstructing people's heads. The reality is the majority of people in our profession don't do that, do they?
No.
They do single unit bridges. Some people will do single unit fixtures. They might do the odd bridge. They do probably quite a lot of dentures. And that's what most people do most of the time. And actually doing all of that digitally is fantastic. We absolutely cannot make a denture in the laboratory. I know we're sort of talking about anterior aesthetics and what have you. Maybe I'm getting off at a tangent, but we send a fantastic digital impression to the laboratory, which is what most people would hope to do. And then the laboratory will then make a fantastic denture that fits in fewer visits.
Well, I think it's a great opportunity, to be honest, because we've already explored the sort of the benefits to the patient in terms of the experience. We've already explored the benefits to the workflow for the operator. But as you've just mentioned, Lino, about the experience for the lab, what is the difference between receiving a digital impression and an analog impression?
All right. Okay, so when it comes to, so one is the communication, right? So,
Okay.
but the beauty of this is that when you get, I'll call it like the digital dentist, all right? So you're doing the DI impressions and you send it to the lab. So when you're getting that, after, like right at the beginning, you might still not notice a big change when it comes to preparations, right? But if you're dealing with a CEREC dentist, so CEREC dentists will prep, will scan, and they start doing their own restorations. So they start feeling a little bit, oh, I think I've under-prepped. So they start feeling a little bit what we feel when we get an analog impression that we can't work with. Now, what I notice basically, the big difference here is that the communication has improved tremendously, and the quality of the work, or the preparations that we're getting, have skyrocketed in terms of quality, right? And why? Because in all honesty, what would happen was that they'll prep, they'll take an impression, and assessing a negative sometimes can be a little bit tricky, but you can still assess, oh, well, can I see the margins, right? But now with digital, you don't have that excuse, because now you've got a positive, it's right in front of you, right? So with that in mind, a lot of the CEREC dentists that I work with, right, I've noticed a massive improvement on the preps, right? Where I wouldn't see that with the analog dentists. So would definitely the CEREC system not just provided a service to their patients, but it's also like a learning tool, where they've for at least what I see on a day-to-day basis, is a massive, huge improvement on what we get to work on. So the big difference is that I think better quality in terms of preparations, and then obviously with the scans, then it's way more accurate. So I don't have to worry about, has there been sort of like defects on the impression taking when I pour the model or the impression, are there distortions? So we eliminate those factors. As long as it's a nice, crisp digital impression, then we know for a fact it will fit to the degree that I trust the system, to the point that single units or even up to like 3-unit bridges, I will do without a model, right? I couldn't do that. Obviously you can't do it because it's analog, right? But you still have to rely on, a lot of the times you're kind of like, I need to do adjustments here. And I find that with digital, there's a massive improvement on the workflow that the labs do on a day-to-day basis, to be honest.
Yeah, I think there's two things there. One, Simon, you were saying earlier on that in terms of wet-fingered dentistry, the accuracy certainly plays a part.
It does. I mean, when you're looking at your preps on big screens, it makes you're absolutely right, you get better. You become more self-aware, not in an AI kind of scary point of view, but you literally look at your preps all the time, and they get better. You become more analytical. You actually think more, which is perhaps that's an indictment that we didn't think enough in the days when we did, or I did things in an analog fashion. But your work improves because you are always aware, particularly if you're making these things, what the pitfalls are. And actually that's not going to work, but you're able to fairly quickly make that decision. Just look at the scan, and then you just go back in and you'll modify your prep. Exactly. And that's great. And also, we were talking about the software and the algorithms in the software. Lino's right. We've seen the software develop over the years, and what's nice is we can feed back things to the manufacturers, the developers, and occasionally they do listen and they make a change that we've said that would be nice, that would be better. And when you see how much the software has improved, in the old days when it came up with a proposal, so it came up with a restoration, there was a fair bit of editing, wasn't there?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah.
Whereas now there's an awful lot less. It's a lot better than it was.
I have to agree. No, it's like in posteriors, I would say that you'll only touch a posterior. If you kind of like, very rarely you will touch a posterior because the algorithm works that well. On the anterior region, I think this is where it requires a little bit of know-how. It's not just working with the biogeneric algorithm that it gives you. A lot of times you'll have to go down the route of using the database and manually position a lot of things. So this is the designing skills and knowing the actual software and what tools to use and when to use them, and a sequence that you need to follow to get that result that you're looking for. But without a doubt, software is
It's incredible.
leaps.
And of course, what you've just described is much easier because all the information you've got is digital.
Precisely.
Isn't it? In terms of manipulating that and using the other software packages, and it's so much more straightforward, isn't it? It doesn't take the skill and the experience away from the technicians that do this, because we've talked about that final 10%. This is something you mentioned, isn't it? And that's the beauty. You're getting fantastic information. We've made the right decision that this is not for us, this is definitely for our laboratory colleagues, and then that's where the top inch, if you like, and their experience comes in. But again, it's easier, so everybody wins from that point of view.
Yes, I think the fundamental is teaming up and always thinking and always having the outcome. Okay, it's all about the patient and what is the best solution for that patient. Can I do it myself and provide the best solution for the patient, or do I cooperate with my lab so we can provide as a team that solution? So I think it's just finding where do I draw the line that I can actually do this and provide the right solution for my patient, or where do I go to the lab and then as a team we work together to provide that solution. So it's just knowing that limit.
When we talk about implants, when you're making implant crowns yourself, again, talking about the improvement, that my immersions profiles are so much better now, and that's because I'm thinking more about, and they always say it's restorative driven, which of course it is, but when you are literally making these things, and in the early days of making, you think, could have maybe put a slightly different healing abutment in here for another couple of weeks just to shape things a bit more. Well, it means that we, rather than having to develop a profile, which you still have to do, but you're just more efficient and better at it. So when I'm making an implant crown, the immersions profile is really good, but also it means that if I'm thinking of these things, I made a conscious decision that where possible we do screw retained crowns. As we all know, that's not always possible. So on the software we get the opportunity to split it, don't we? We can make and manufacture an abutment and then a cement retained crown. I don't do that now. It's too much hassle for me. So in the occasion where I need a cement retained implant restoration, it goes off to my laboratory and they do a great job for me. And that's the decision that I made probably about 2 years ago. I just don't do them anymore because I don't do them as well as you. Yeah,
it's just that fine tuning in a way, and
and I guess this is very much a personal experience, isn't it? Because I guess I maybe started this particular conversation maybe expecting that we could almost be prescriptive in how far you can take CEREC, but actually you can't, can you? This is going to be a very personal journey for a clinician and a practice as a whole to know where those limitations lie and how far they want to take it.
Yeah, because I think it could be different for Simon, could be different for it's an individual, because a lot of people will have, well, I feel more comfortable, I can do this, and they'll actually do a really good job. And then others don't. So I think, like you said, it's very difficult to kind of like say, there's the borderline, you can't cross that, and you can't do that, because that line could be in different spots for different people.
We're all in different places and different circumstances, aren't we? And there are people that, yes, we do lots of chairside milling, and the one thing I wouldn't want to do is come across as somebody that poo-poos people that just do digital impressions. I use the word just. DI is fantastic, and you will get great information to your laboratory, and they'll make something fantastic for you. And that is as far as some people want to go, whereas other people are comfortable doing both. And that's the great thing about the flexibility of the system. With CEREC particularly, you can do what you want really, and some people will do more than others.
Yeah, exactly. It's just how far you actually want to push the boundaries. So it's how far you actually want to take yourself in that journey. Do I just want to take that nice, easy sort of route, or do I actually want to explore and see the limitations of the actual system, and then getting to the point, okay, this is how far I can go with this, and then from now, I definitely have to go down the route with working with the lab.
But by the sounds of it from both of you, that journey is quite an enjoyable one.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Oh, it is.
I wouldn't go back. I can't go back to analog, and I don't think I know how to work that way. I stick with digital.
I've mentioned before to you, John, that I occasionally say to the girls at work, I say, should we take a silicon impression? And they look at me as though I've lost the plot. For them, it's much, much better. And there's absolutely no going back from it.
No, it's digital all the way now.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is an absolutely appropriate conclusion for this particular session. So, Simon and Lino, thank you both very much for joining me. It's been, again, an absolute pleasure. There is going to be an opportunity for you guys to break out into a discussion room now. So if you would like to discuss any of the points that you've heard in this or other sessions, please do feel free to break out into that. But thank you very much indeed for joining us.